This is an interesting one. In today's video, we'll be looking at inheritance. We'll be discussing what is inheritance and specificity, what gets inherited, and inheritance and text align. Turn up the volume, let's get started. So this video is getting my more difficult stamp. The concepts we're going to be exploring are just a little bit more challenging, especially towards the end of the video, when we talk about inheritance and text align. So what is CSS inheritance? It's when properties set on parent elements are passed down to their children by default. Let's take a look at an example to see what I mean. We have this snippet of HTML where we have a div container element with the class hero section, and it contains a heading 1 and paragraph element. Looking now at the CSS, we've added the CSS rule color blue to the hero section. Now this rule is set on a parent. So what happens here is the parent element passes down this styling to its children. So the H1 and paragraph get this blue color. And we say the blue color is inherited. So that's the basic idea of inheritance. Properties set on parent elements will be passed down to their children. And now quickly want to touch on inheritance and specificity. Specific selectors will override inherited styles, as inherited styles have a very low specificity. I'm going to update our CSS to now include this rule, where we're styling our paragraph red. We're using the type selector here, which has a higher specificity compared to inherited styles, meaning our rule above, where we're adding the color blue to the container and it's being passed down to the heading, is a very low specificity. So almost any time we're using a specific selector, like a type, class, or ID selector, to target a specific element, it will always override inherited styles. So in our paragraph, the red color is applied, as it's overriding the blue color applied on the div, which is being inherited by the paragraph. Let's see this in action inside DevTools on the monday.com homepage. I'm going to right-click, Inspect to open up the DevTools, and I'm just going to select this text over here. We can see the styles that have been applied directly to this element here. It's got a font weight of 600, font size 60 pixels, and a line height of 100%. If we scroll down, we can see over here inherited from. This color is being inherited from somewhere else. If I scroll down more, you can see that the text align center is also being inherited. Now I want to show you an example of what I was talking about earlier. How applying styles directly on the element will always override conflicting inherited styles. You can see here, for example, the font size is being set to 60 pixels directly on the element. If I scroll down here and have a look at inherited from body, which is the body tag, the font size 16 pixels has been crossed out. It's because, as I mentioned earlier, applying styles with inheritance has a very low specificity. So when we have conflicting styles, one which is being inherited versus one which is being applied directly, the one which is being applied directly will always win out. And that's why we end up with a font size of 60 pixels. So the next question I want to answer is what gets inherited? It is mainly text properties that are inherited from parent to child. So color like these. I'm not going to read them out, but feel free to pause to have a look at them. This is really important to remember. It's mainly text properties that are inherited. So try your best to remember that fact, because it can sometimes be confusing when you're applying a property to a parent and you're wondering why it isn't being inherited. More often than not, you're applying a non-text property. So by way of example, let's say we have the same HTML snippet we saw before, and we now apply these two styles to the div, a color blue and a border that's 5 pixels solid and black. Now I know we haven't looked at the border property yet. We'll be discussing it at great length in the next topic, but unfortunately at this stage, we haven't really covered many non-text properties, so I have to put something there, and hopefully border is somewhat intuitive. Because border is a non-text property, it's not going to be inherited by the children, so only the color blue will be passed down to the heading and paragraph. So let's go play around with inheritance inside VS Code. I've created a new mini project where I have an index.html file with the boilerplate ready. I've added in a link element, which links to an empty style sheet app.css. All right, inside the body, let's go add a container element with some div tags. I'm then going to add in an H1, a paragraph, and an anchor tag. I'm just going to give this div a class of hero-section. Heading over to app.css, let's select this class, and we'll give it a few text properties. Font size of 30 pixels, the color blue, and let's make it all uppercase with text transform uppercase. Let's check this out in the browser. So let's look at what we see here. I'm going to start with the paragraph. This element has inherited everything from the container. The color is blue and it's all uppercase. Now for the anchor tag, the font size is 30 pixels and it's all uppercase, but it isn't blue. And the reason is because the browser has built-in styles that are applied directly to the element. We saw this in the pseudo class video, where we can style the pseudo class visited. Because I have visited google.com, the default styling of the visited pseudo class in the browser is purple. So that default style will override the inherited style, which we know has a very low specificity. And the same thing's happening on the heading here. The heading is inheriting the blue color and text transform uppercase, but the font size is bigger than 30 pixels. And we can actually see this default browser styling inside DevTools. If I go to inspect and click on the heading, you can see over here the H1 have these default styles that are set directly on it inside the browser. One of them is font size 2M. And you can see my styling, which I'm setting on the parent and is being inherited, is being crossed out. And because there's no default styling for color or text transform, they are being applied. But we have conflicting rules for font size set directly on the H1 for the default styling in the browser, and for the font size I'm setting on the parent, which is being inherited. And as we know, inheritance has a very low specificity, so the default font size of 2Ms will win. Now in practice, don't let this freak you out too much, because it's very rare we're actually going to be using the default styles inside the browser. Like we've seen in our Quill project already, we are explicitly styling the H1 in our CSS. So in almost all cases, we're always going to override the default browser styling with our own styles. And this brings me to the important topic of inheritance guidance. Make sure you marry a rich partner. That's good advice for the real world. But in CSS, global font styles are set on the body element so that all child text elements inherit styles by default. Let's have a look at an example of what I mean with this snippet of HTML. I've got a section container, which has inside a heading and paragraph, and then I've got a footer with a single paragraph. Inside the CSS, we would select the body element, which we know is the main wrapper element inside the HTML file for all content displayed on the page. We would set default text properties here, like the color, font weight, and font family. All these text properties are then inherited. Now, a property like font size would not be set here, because usually every text element, like a heading 1, heading 2, paragraph, etc., has its own distinct font size. Whereas setting something like a color is a good idea. It gives us a base color for all our text elements, and then anytime we need a specific color, we can just override it with specific styling rules. We'll be using this method in our Quill project in the next video, so make sure to check that out to see this in action. Once we've done that, we next want to set global font styles on type selectors, which will override inherited properties. I'm going to make some more space in our CSS file here, and I'm going to add this H1. The properties defined in the body are still being inherited, and any newly defined conflicting styles, like color and font weight, will override the inherited styles. So the H1 will now have a color of blue, a font weight of 700. The font family will still be Arial, which is inherited from the body, as there's no conflicting style there. And the font size, which is a newly defined property, will be 52 pixels. Setting default text properties on the body element is very, very common. But inheritance is also often utilized for a container that requires specific text styling. In the HTML snippet we have on the left here, I'm going to simply add a class to the section with the value hero section. I'm then going to update our CSS, where I'm targeting the hero section and adding a text transform property. So this style is applied on the container. So we end up with our heading 1, which will result in uppercase on both heading and paragraph elements. So it's very common to use inheritance both to set default text styles on the body, as well as use inheritance within particular sections of the page. So the last thing I want to focus on is inheritance and the text align property, as this can cause a lot of confusion. We've already seen text align affects block level elements, but has no impact on inline level elements. We spent a fair bit of time with this in the previous topic when we were looking at text elements. But just as a quick recap, let's say I have a page with a heading 1 and a paragraph. Headings and paragraphs are block elements, which means they take up the full width of the page. If we were to apply text align center onto the heading and paragraph, the content inside the box gets centered. So our text will display like this. And this is because there's space to move within the box of the heading and paragraph. Let's compare this behavior to the anchor tag. An anchor tag is an inline element, which means it only takes up the width of the content and doesn't extend the full width of the page. So if we were to apply text align to the anchor tag, there is no space to center the text. So the anchor tag doesn't move. Jumping back into VS Code with the file we were playing around with earlier, I've got a heading 1, a paragraph, and an anchor tag. I'm going to head over to app.css and just remove these styles. The heading 1, I'll grab text align and set the value to center. For the paragraph, I'll do the same thing. And for the anchor tag, I'm also going to set text align to center. So let's check this out in the browser. So as expected, our block level elements, the heading and paragraph, get centered, whereas there's no impact on the anchor tag. And we can see why visually when I go to DevTools. When I click on the heading, you can see the blue box, which is the space the heading can move. The same for the paragraph tag. Whereas when I hover over the anchor tag, the blue box is just the content itself. There's no space for it to move. So now I want to show you something which will blow your mind. I'm going to remove these styles. And now I'm going to add text align onto the parent container, this div here. I'll add the class hero section, and I'll put text align as center. I'm going to refresh the page and watch what happens. Both the block and inline elements are being centered. So what is happening here? So we've just seen that when applying the text align property to a block level parent containing inline elements, all children will be impacted. So in the example we just looked at, we had a block level parent, which is a div. And as a quick reminder, a div is a blockline element. And we applied text align center to this, which ended up centering the block elements and the inline elements. So there's actually two things going on here. The first is that child elements are centered, where the child elements here are the heading 1, paragraph, and anchor tag. To really highlight this point, I kind of want to move away from these elements. I'm going to fill in the block elements like this, and I'm going to fill in the inline element like this. Now for the block elements, there is no impact on block elements as the element is already full width. I want us to view these elements as children, rather than specific H1, paragraph, etc. elements. Just view it as a red box. Because the red box is a block element, it takes up the full width. So this child cannot move anywhere inside the div. In contrast, the inline element is centered as it has space to move. Again, just view it as a green box inside this div element. And because text align center is set on the div, which means all child elements of the div are centered, the inline element will be centered. And it has space to move because the inline element only takes up the width of the content itself. So that's the first thing going on. Child elements are centered, and the major impact here is on inline elements, which end up being centered. And there's actually no impact on block elements. Now, something else I want to quickly mention before we move on is that this in fact can be any inline element. For example, if we had an image that was this size, it would also be centered. So that's why I took this approach of coloring it in green. I just want you to see it as a green box. It doesn't really matter what inline element it is. From the div's perspective, it just sees it as a general child. So let's now have a look at the second thing going on. The second thing happening is that child elements inherit the text align property. And again, inheritance is when we're passing on the property from parent to child. It's like the H1 and paragraph now have text align applied directly to them through inheritance. And this is just now the standard behavior we've seen before, where text is centered inside block elements as there's space to move. So the second thing that would happen is our text inside our block elements, H1 and paragraph, will center. And there's no impact on inline elements as text has no space to move. Again, this is just a regular behavior we've always seen. When you try to apply text-align center onto an anchor tag, it won't move. And in this case, the text-align center property has been inherited from the parent div. So the net effect from these two different things going on is that both the block elements and the inline element are centered. Now, at the end of the day, you just need to remember that when you apply the text-align property onto a block-level container like a div, everything inside it will get centered. I spent a bit of time explaining what's going on behind the scenes because I think it is useful you have a basic understanding. So let's finish off by building our next summary card, inheritance and the universal selector. In this video, we looked at inheritance, which is where properties set on parent elements are passed to child elements by default. And we saw this was mainly for text properties. We saw an example with a snippet of HTML like this, and we applied CSS styling rules onto the body. And we saw that all the text properties were inherited by all the HTML elements wrapped by the body tag. For inheritance guidance, we said global font styles are set on the body element. We also looked at inheritance and text-align. We saw that when applying text-align to a block-level parent, both block and inline elements are impacted. We looked at an example where we had a div, and we applied the text-align property to this div container. We had an H1 and paragraph, which are both block elements, and block elements inherit the text-align property. This causes them to center inside their box. We saw an anchor tag, which is an inline element, and inline elements have space to move inside the block container, which results in the anchor tag being centered. So applying text-align to a container results in both block and inline elements being centered, just through different mechanisms. Don't forget, you can download all the summary cards and presentation slides from the Bootcamp in the link in the description below. Alright, I know that was a bit of a harder one, but stick with me. Things get easier from now. To move on to the next video in the playlist, click here, and click here to subscribe to the channel to get updates.